Okay, so in this video, I'm just going to take you through some of the principles of blade production, and I'm going to use my trusty potato again, and my knife as a hammerstone. So the first thing that we'd do if we're going to turn something like this into a blade core, if it were a big lump of flint, would be to knock a big flake off one end to create a platform. So I'll just do that now. So that would now be the ideal platform surface for the top of our core. Now there's a number of different ways you could strike blades off this, and the simplest way obviously would just be to take one flake and then another flake next to it, and then there we have our first guiding ridge for blades, and we could start to continue to strip off that cortex and make these parallel ridges all the way around the outside. And by positioning the blades very close to each other, you can create parallel ridges that are very close, and in that way you can set up a number of ridges on your flake, 1, 2, 3 or whatever. So that would be the simplest way, but one technique that was very common starting from the Upper Paleolithic onwards, and we see it right through into the Neolithic and so on, is what we call setting up a crested blade, or a lame crête in French. And the way this was done was, having taken off the top platform, the napper would then create a bifacially flaked ridge down the front, which would guide the production of the ridge. So I'll just show you how this would be done. So if we imagine a flake being taken off in that direction first, and then another one taken back in this direction, like so, so that we get the start of a ridge, and then another one like so. And these could actually be quite deep and invasive often, to really make that front of that core quite narrow and steep. And then another one back this way, another one back this way, and so on. So in doing it, in preparing the core in this way, you're not only creating a ridge, you're also steepening the angle at the front there, so you're creating quite a narrow fronted core. And when we get to things like the later period, say the Neolithic, then they actually start to make these beautiful bidirectional cores where they're flaking in two directions, and they make their front of their core very, very narrow indeed, like the naviform cores or the boat-shaped cores. So having made our ridge on the front, then you could strike off our crested blade, which would look like so. Ideally that would have come a bit further down, but that gives us the idea. And then on the front of that blade would be the remnant of the crest, so the bidirectional flaking, or the bifacial flaking along that ridge. And then of course we've got our ridges set up so that the next blade will have a little bit of that bifacial flaking still present, and so too on this side. And then we'd have our series of ridges, and we'd just continue to work our way around the outside then, like so. And the closer we strike to the edge, the thinner our blades will be, as we'd expect. So thick blades can also be taken off. Another thing that we sometimes see with blade flaking is that, having made a little blade like so, there's unfortunately a step termination, and that prevents any further flaking along that ridge. Now, there's a number of ways that people could deal with that step termination. They could strike a flake off to the edge and trim it away that bit by bit. But a common technique actually was to strike a bigger blow quite far into the core, and then that would actually overshoot, or outrepasse, the bottom of the core off, and that would remove the step termination in that way, and then flaking could resume. Okay, so that's probably the most common ways that we could make a blade core. Having made the blades, of course, there's lots of different things you can do with them. I'll just take off one or two more little blades to show you. So having made a blade, of course, that's, you know, the sort of thing that could be quite nicely used as a projectile point. You could shape the distal end of that, as was often done in the Upper Paleolithic, into a lovely little end scraper by taking flakes off around the end like so. You could make a little round-ended end scraper, and those were commonly used for scraping skins and things like that, and they were hafted. Another thing that could be done with a blade of this kind is it could be turned into a burin. So the way they often did the burin was that they would steeply blunt one edge by truncating it with some steep retouch up at the end there, and then a slightly different kind of retouch. The Buren spall would actually take off this sharp edge, the lateral margin of the flake like so, and strike off this spall. And in so doing, that blunt edge that we've created, or it's not really actually blunt, it's quite sharp on this point, but that facet that's been created on the edge now is what's called a Buren, and that's perfect for things like bone working and antler working. That tip there creates a very, very sharp engraving tool. So that would be our Buren, but you could also then use that Buren spall, that facet, as the platform for another Buren spall, like so, and then you get what's called a dihedral Buren. You've got a facet on this side and a facet on that side, and that now creates the ultimate very, very sharp engraving and scraping tool for working things like bone.